good evening or good afternoon or good morning to you all who are tuning in to this course of Medita Mundi on meditation. My name is Edward Winfield. I've been a Gnostic instructor for 20 years, and we continue delving into this extraordinary science of awakening consciousness and of meditation, which is, of course, one of the most powerful tools for achieving awareness of oneself and the inner world within inside of us. So it's a great pleasure for us to be with you this evening and to have you all sharing this knowledge. Many of you probably have a great deal of experience in spiritual quests and in practices of different kinds, including meditation, and perhaps others of you merely beginning to wake up to the notion that meditation could bring us many benefits, of which perhaps we're not aware, the enormous spectrum of benefits which we of course can achieve through meditation. So these are 3 classes in this worldwide campaign which you're receiving in different language, brought to you by International Gnostic Culture. There is no money involved, there is no secret agenda involved, and there is, of course, an invitation to download on the QR codes you'll be seeing information, references about meditation, and also an invitation to do free online courses with an instructor in your language, in this case English, and you can subscribe to the nearest place or region according to where you live. So having said all this, let's look at the presentation. What is meditation and its underlying principles is the first class that we will be looking at. That is today. And then tomorrow, in the second session, we will be looking at the next slide, which we will see now. We can move on. We will see the second slide, please. That would be objectives and benefits of this ancient science. As the title implies, meditation is not something new. It's as old as consciousness itself, or it's as old as consciousness has manifested itself in human form, and that humans have the possibility of discovering the magical world of our body, our senses, and the capacity to create and discover a new world within inside of us that connects us to the wider and greater universe. So we can claim or say that the objectives of meditation are what you want them to be in many ways. If you just want a process for relaxation and well-being, then meditation is obviously a powerful tool. If you actually want to awaken internally, spiritually, and achieve something grandiose or extraordinary like self-transformation and fuse with the universe, or the self-realization as it's called, then meditation is also a necessary tool for this process, without which none of these things can be achieved. So if we move on to the next slide, then we'll see the third lesson the day after tomorrow, on the 19th, is how to meditate in practice. We will be looking at not only these 3 aspects during the 3 classes, we will also be taking a short time to do breathing exercises and begin some basic preparation for these practices. Obviously, in 3 classes, we can't take ourselves into very deep internal experiences of ecstasy, separation from the body, and awakening in inspired higher levels of consciousness. However, we can describe the processes, and we can look at the practical ways with time, effort, and continuity, and self-discipline, which is also a part of the process. We can achieve many, many benefits and advance on the path. So let's move on then to the first class and look at the next slide, please. The objectives and benefits of meditation, as we said, we will look at in the next class. So we'll move on to that because we'll be dealing with that tomorrow. So if we can see the next slide, that would be useful. We're working with a technical team, so I will ask Jorge for the next lamina. Briefly, health, mind, consciousness, the three aspects we'll be looking at in the second class. Meditation has everything to do with health and well-being and all these aspects of our physical body, our nervous system and organs, endocrine system, and so on. In terms of our mind, we must also have a look at what is mind and what's the difference between mind and consciousness, and what's meditation got to do with separating our awareness, leaving mind and entering into a state of consciousness in the absence of the thinking, rational mind. For that, we need to know about concentration and focusing. And then we come to the most profound, the most important aspect of meditation, this science, which is consciousness itself. What is consciousness? And how can we either awaken, as we call it, or expand our consciousness? And how this can allow us to obtain direct perception of our own inner nature, and consequently of understanding, if you like, what's behind the curtains of nature herself, physical nature. And ultimately, the aim of existence itself is spiritual and is to achieve union with the sublime, the divine, or the inner being, as we call, or as we refer to the inner divinity, if you like. And the term for that, or the science for that, is the science of self-realization. So meditation, as you can see, has touches every aspect of our physical, mental, and spiritual lives, also emotional, sexual, instinctual aspects of our bodies and of our experiences within the body. So let's see the next slide and move into what is meditation and its underlying principles. Well, we talked a bit about what meditation is in terms of how it can help us to improve our lives or move on spiritually, but we need to we have to put it all into a context. So we've written inverted understanding of life, because the way we're brought up in most of the world is almost upside down. We're taught that almost like we are the body, and we are very much focused on our senses and the sensuality of existing within the body. So we take very literally the things that we see. We take very literally what we feel, what we can touch. Our instincts, emotions, and sexuality, our drives are extremely important to us. Combining that with the whole mental dimension of, we project normally a materialistic idea of the future, in the West certainly, based on the exteriorization of having things, achieving things in some distant future or near future, without actually knowing whether we're going to ever achieve it. So we live in a very artificial fashion when it comes to direct perception of what's really going on. So now we need to look at, well, if that's the case, then what is going on with existence? What is going on with being alive? What is going on with having a body in the first place? Which is obviously an extensive and interesting subject. But how can we synthesize the whole thing? Well, first of all, we need to understand that the entire universe is actually consciousness. It's all about energy and consciousness. Wherever there is energy, there is consciousness. There is movement, there is sound, there is vibration, there is frequencies. And so if we look at the next slide, we can begin to understand that, if Jorge can move us on, please, that would be, thank you. This energy of which we're talking about, the whole universe is pulsating with, we call it bioelectromagnetic energy. And it flows through all the dimensions of creation, which is something, again, we're going to have to look at. We almost think that life is three-dimensional, and even though our perceptions and our feelings and emotions are not three-dimensional, we feel them through the body, and therefore we have the idea that actually there is not a great deal beyond the 3D scenario of the physical senses. This, of course, is a mistake, because the physical world, the physical body, everything that we can see and touch is an unfolding and a complication or multiplication of something simpler that comes down from a higher frequency, i.e. creation itself begins from the most simplest and purest and highest frequencies and vibrations in the cosmos. And therefore, the more these forces of creation unfold, then the more phenomenon there is, the more complication there is, and the more dimensions there are, until eventually we come down to what we call the three dimensions, or the physical realm. And here we find ourselves in a physical body. But we've not taught in our educational system, not even mainly in many spiritual or religious schooling that we may have had, that actually we are in an essence that is itself learning and growing, and has also descended from higher dimensions of consciousness and has descended into matter to experience itself through the physical form, i.e. having a body. And that's why we say that our version of consciousness is inverted. Our perceptions are inverted, because actually we come from a higher plane of consciousness and we find ourselves in a highly complicated condition in a dualistic world of yes and no, right and wrong, and comparisons and anything that comes in between extremes. And actually direct perception of consciousness, intuition, and so on is something that we experience in a very reduced rate. And that's why meditation is so important, because it helps us to separate and distance from the this mental vision or scheme of things that we have, where our mind wishes to explain everything, have answers to everything, and if we have a problem, we go to our mind and try and find some aspect of our mind that gives us an answer. Whereas the object of existence itself is to go inwards, to go deep, and to be able to discover the meaning of our own existence, the meaning of our duality, our problems, our conflicts, our hopes, our fears, to go inside, discover them, get to know them all, and thereby eliminate elements of fear, subjectiveness, and achieve true knowledge of ourselves, and therefore consequently obtain access to true nature by discovering our own true nature, rather than the artificial personality that our culture and civilization has helped us to create, mainly in the West, through over-focusing on intellectualism and the mind, and underdeveloping consciousness, intuition, and all the inner faculties. So that said, let's look at the next slide. And as our planet, as we saw in that image, is an energetic phenomenon, it has also magnetic poles, and it is a generator of life and energy. It's quite an extraordinary phenomenon, which we could spend many hours discussing. If we look at this next slide, then we see we ourselves are also a bioelectrical, magnetical, biological, organic machine. And we're almost a replica of the planet in the sense we also have poles. We also produce energy. We create energy all the time. We receive energy from the sun, and we transform energy from the plants, who have transformed it from the earth. We breathe in the air, and we also, our food is not only physical food, we also feed ourselves through what we see and through what we think and what we feel. So we are also a highly complex machine, most extraordinary machine that has been produced through evolution and creation. And as you can see in the image, most of us nowadays are familiar with the fact that we have energy centers. We are internally in the inner dimensions. We have a vital plane, an astral plane, a mental dimension, and so on. And the chakras or energy centers of our inner anatomy have to be stimulated, charged, attended to, so that they can be cleaned and function for us, connecting our physical senses to our inner senses. So just as we have 5 outward senses, we also have corresponding inner senses, which connect us to an awakening in the inner dimensions of our own universe, and consequently the universe around us. So meditation, again, is a crucial part of the science of living, the science of learning, the science of awakening, and the science of experience. So if we move on to the next slide, then here we have what most of us would consider, yes, okay, this is what we are, our body. I am me, I have a name. and I know what I look like when I'm in the mirror. Everyone knows me through my photo and so on. And you can hear me because you've got ears. You can see an image coming in of me through the camera, and so on. So we have eyes, ears, taste, smell, touch, and so on. However, we also have a mental dimension, and we also have a higher plane of perception, which we would call consciousness or awareness, which is why all of us have heard the term self-awareness. And we all know that self-awareness, to be aware of what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what we're doing, is not the same as thinking about it. So thinking is a function of the mind. The mind is useful for thinking. And consciousness is actually useful for meaning and understanding and comprehension of what we are experiencing. So in effect, the mind should be a tool of our consciousness, whereas what we have become is slaves of our mind, which has become hugely overcomplicated, and which stresses us out, causes us endless problems. And the worst of it is we try to take refuge in our mind, trusting that the mind will give us answers. And if we all begin to observe ourselves, that is to say, use inward vision and become an observer of our own selves through relaxing, we will find very quickly, if we observe our mind, that we are an infinite contradictory number of thinkers. And we find ourselves almost, when we have a problem, we chuck it up into the mind and we start listening to the mental radio. And we hear different speakers with their own philosophies, ideas, telling us often totally contradictory things. And we sit there listening to them. We don't even know which one is true and which one is not. And if you looked at that from the outside, it'd be very clear that we are very messed up. And if we were to speak out all of these different voices, these different thoughts, many people would consider us mental cases, i.e. that we ought to be seeing, getting treatment. And which, of course, is why we find there is a popular joke certainly in Latin American culture, where it said, well, what's the difference between a crazy person and a sane person? And the answer comes back, well, the sane person doesn't say what they think, and the crazy person says everything that they think. And so in reality, there is no difference. That if we were to speak out everything that goes through our mind, everyone would think we were crazy, because we think so many peculiar things and don't seem to have very much control over our thought processes, which means we are unconscious of our own self. We are unconscious of our own mind, and we have not developed tools in school, in university, in practical life, mainly to go into our unconscious and shine light into it and find out what is going on in there, so that we do not depend on subjective mind and live in a subjective society, in a subjective version of reality, which is not reality at all, and wonder why we suffer so much and have so many problems and find it so difficult to realize our dreams and hopes and aspirations, and why the world is becoming increasingly more difficult, complicated, and turmoil seems to be the order of the day. And as turmoil inside of us grows and expresses itself all over the world in more aggressive, more stressed behavior, we also see that our climate is also becoming highly stressed, and the exterior aspects of the creation of our world are also becoming losing control. And we see that in these flash floods in the Middle East now. We see it in the wars going on. We see it in the droughts around the world. And as it were, we can see that the inner side of human life is not under control, and the exterior, this is causing chaos around us. And this is very important to understand. So if we move on to the next image, then, or the next slide, Jorge, then we will see again the body and the senses. We've touched on them. And at this stage, well, we need to think about and contemplate the notion that calmness, serenity is an absolute must. It's a necessity for all of us nowadays. Stress is a huge burdening factor in our lives. It's a crippling thing. It cripples our health and so on. And all of us suffer for it in one way or another. And all of those people who are experts at controlling their lives and dealing with situations and have are well advanced in all these processes, well, please excuse, because these talks are introductory. And so we are effectively stating the obvious for many of you. But for others, these things are not at all obvious. And many of us, many people all around the world suffer terribly, physically, mentally, emotionally. We're all victims of the society that has brought us up and given us this false sense of what's called reality and civilization. And therefore, of course, we don't have the solutions because we're not taught them. So breathing, we have to learn to breathe. This is hugely important. We have to learn to relax and learn to breathe, as we see in these images, which we'll look at again tomorrow and in the third lecture. Learning to be conscious of our breathing. Our body knows how to look after itself. Unfortunately, our interests don't coincide often with the interests of our body, in the sense that the body knows and needs how to be relaxed. If we look at a cat, when the cat is tired and comes in, it just flops out, and it's totally relaxed. It gives in completely to itself. Whereas we're so full of stress most often, we sit down, want to relax, and we can't relax because we've never learned to relax. And so it's a weird thing now, as most of us as adults now have to go on courses to learn how to relax. And that consists basically in learning how to breathe, learning how to allow your body to calm down so the joints are not stressed and in a comfortable position. Meditation, as you can see here, does not have one fixed posture. Some of us have this stereotyped idea that we have to be in the lotus position to meditate. That's not actually the case. As you can see, a guy sitting down on a chair, his back is straight. That is important. And we can see on the left someone reclining on a couch, and that's also a very valid position. And the important is this posture relaxation, and tomorrow we'll look at other aspects of preparation for the actual process. So if we move on now, we'll have a look at another slide there, Jorge. And we've talked a bit about mind. Now, the underlying principles of meditation. We've mentioned that mind is based on comparisons. It's based, we call it duality, or the duality of mind. Our mind, because it's based on a series of rational thoughts, it's based on opposites. It's based on comparing yes and no, right and wrong, dark and light, I like, I don't like, it's good, it's bad. And we create the illusion of experience in function of mental processes, and then we try and map the exterior world and our emotions and our feelings into this framework of concepts. So we are taught that there are actually three types of mind. The mind itself, is nothing wrong with the mind. It's the way that we have used it and the way our civilization has reduced itself to a mental civilization, mostly, which has made us a materialistic civilization, which has made us a selfish civilization, which has made us a self-seeking civilization, which has made us into a consumerist civilization, which of course is disastrous for nature and well-being, because they're not in that sense, they're almost opposed and they're unbalanced. So to discover we have these three minds we've mentioned. The sensual mind is the one that's related to all our physical needs, desires, and the senses. And the intermediate mind is related to our concepts, which we just mentioned, our beliefs, our ideologies, and so on. And then we have something called the inner mind. And the inner mind is all about what happens when you're not thinking. So paradoxically, by not thinking, your mind changes gear and you enter into a more direct sense of perception, which is related to something called intuition, which all of us have. You just know something and you don't know why or how, you just know it. So it is fundamentally important for us to understand that our mind, as it is, as we have it, is almost our worst enemy when it comes to direct knowledge and experience and awakening of consciousness. And it has to be tamed, it has to be calmed. We have to learn to perceive things, ourselves, beyond thinking in order for us to use our mind consciously, i.e. we use the mind when we need it to solve a problem. We have a problem, how do we get from A to B? Or how do we pay the bills? How do we do this? We need to think about that. We need to work it out, and for that we need a rational mind. But beyond that, we cannot achieve meaning through rational thinking. We cannot achieve direct knowledge of existence through rational thinking. So that's why calming the mind is the first step. And we talk about that tomorrow. Concentration and focus, again, is all part of the method. How can we learn to, by calming ourselves, to concentrate and focus our attention? And once the mind becomes less active, we can begin to experience what we've never experienced before. And this is something that doesn't happen instantaneously. It's a discipline which requires enormous, it requires time to be able to develop it. But the results are that once we're out of our mind in a positive sense, once we're actually separate from it and are experiencing consciousness inside of ourselves in a relaxed state, almost asleep, then freed from the ties or the prison of mental concepts. And therefore we can begin to experience ourselves, our situations, our problems, our relationships, our aspirations, our fears, our ego, all of these things, and investigate. Because our perceptions work differently, because our consciousness is now functioning more freely. And therefore we can obtain insight, comprehension, and develop intuition. So if we move on to the next slide, Jorge, then we will see this takes us to consciousness. So we're talking about effectively an exodus, or a journey, if you like, in our own selves of training ourselves out of mental processes, out of depending on our mind, out of trusting our mind, which actually generally complicates us a lot and separates us from true well-being and consciousness. And our aim ultimately is to enter into the world of feeling and enter into the world of heart, enter into the world of perception and awareness. And this, again, this is something we will carry on explaining more deeply over the next 2 days. So what does consciousness give us? What happens when we're not thinking and we're actually tuned in, focused, centered, and connected? Our consciousness is now available to us. It's working for us. What do we experience? We begin to have direct experience of what's inside of ourselves, what's going on inside of ourselves. And this consequently begins to give us insight into the different dimensions of nature itself and creation itself. And this is obviously a process where the great meditators, the great gurus, masters, prophets, were able to free themselves of mental processes, free their consciousness, awaken it, and then travel in the dimensions of creation and obtain knowledge, universal knowledge, truth. So what truth is not about what I think I've discovered by thinking about it, or somebody has told me about it, or I've read about it, even what we're talking about here, that I've read the works of somebody who meditated, of somebody who awakened, and therefore I know about. Well, my mind has information about these dimensions, about what somebody else experienced directly. I don't have that experience. So we must understand that this is not about obtaining. We need information, and we need our mind to be able to organize information and have clear ideas. That is obvious. But that has nothing to do with actually experiencing truth, experiencing existence, and by awakening consciousness. So direct experience of the inner dimensions of nature is a fundamental objective of meditation, because it reconnects us to our own universality. It connects us to who we are, where we come from, and what was the point of being born in the first place. So the point of being born in the first place, if we accept that our essence comes from a higher plane where there is only consciousness and light, but there is no knowledge of experience, and then it unfolds, comes down, and eventually clothes itself with a physical body, and has experiences through the clothing of the physical body and the senses, and then embarks on an extraordinary adventure of learning and making mistakes, complicating itself, and free will, and all these extraordinary things. At the end of the day, certainly in our case, the end result is complication rather than freedom. So now, those of us who are interested in freeing ourselves of our own complication must evidently embark on an inner journey of self-discovery in order to undo and discover what we can't remember, which is where we come from. I.e., we live in a civilization that suffers from amnesia. Our civilization doesn't recognize known history beyond what official history books say. But it's quite clear that, it's certainly in the East, it's blatantly obvious that consciousness is non-corporeal, it's not physical. And therefore, the consciousness continues after death, and having an experience in a body is a process of coming and going. And again, meditation is, all the great meditators have all been able to understand these processes. So in that sense, our journey through meditation to awakening consciousness is returning. Our aim is to return to where we came from, but with a knowledge of how and what happened in the process, which is why if we don't go into ourselves, we will always be living in a programmed society of amnesiacs, where we're walking up and down, having families, living, dying, and doing all kinds of things, good or bad, right or wrong, and we die without knowing why we were born, because we have not awakened consciousness. And so consciousness isn't really about being good or bad. These are dualistic concepts. Consciousness is beyond good and bad. It's beyond right and wrong, which is why you cannot achieve consciousness through thinking. It's not possible, because the mind is it's, if you like, a secondary or a lower function of consciousness. So inspiration is necessary for these things. Music, elevating our thoughts, elevating our style of life, elevating our conversations, inspiring ourselves in things we look at, the things we listen to, and so on. All of these are ways of changing our perceptions and stimulating our consciousness. And this, of course, helps to produce a state which we must is necessary for meditation and awakening, which is contemplation. Which you can't contemplate beauty if you're stressed. You can't contemplate nature and creation if you're running up and down all over the place trying to fulfill an overfilled agenda. It's not possible. And most of us spend most of our working lives nowadays, sadly, wasting our time working to pay bills and feed our families, but at the expense of consciousness, at the expense of beauty, at the expense of harmony, at the expense of health, at the expense of knowledge, at the expense of peace, at the expense of harmony, at the expense of beauty. And therefore we live uninspired, mostly, existences. And this is a terrible, tragic thing that is going on in our civilization and all around the world. And the object of meditation, the object of spiritual science and life science is to awaken and to be able to free ourselves of our own limitations. Because of course we can't just blame civilization for our problems. We have to take responsibility for them. And that of course means that if we talk about meditation, it's actually a process which if we persist in it, it is part of a science that will ultimately take us to the experience of a state of ecstasis, inner freedom, unbounding freedom, unbounding space, and unbounding love and light. And eventually, the great sages and wise men and meditators around the world have all talked about this extraordinary phenomenon called the illuminating void, sometimes called omniscience. It's a state when the consciousness is absolutely free of mind, absolutely free of personality, absolutely free of the physical realm. And it's now totally free to travel into a space where those who have been there are transformed by it and cannot explain it in words, and in which everything is understandable, everything is comprehensible. And that's something that's very interesting. If other people have managed to achieve this, it's not a question of whether you like it or you don't like it, or you agree with it or you don't agree with it, or to believe it or you don't believe it. If it exists, then it's worth investigating. And so meditation is not a superficial science. It can be used superficially, trivially. It can be used in all kinds of commercial exercises with unending YouTubers, TikTokers talking about the most basic aspects of relaxation and well-being and so on. But actually, the science of meditation is the reason for existing at all, in as much as it reconnects us to our inner being, the reason for our existing. It makes us aware and enables us and empowers us to comprehend why we were born, where we come from, what were we doing before we were born, and what goes on after we pass on and leave the clothing of the physical body and are freed from the physical body. And actually life does continue, but not in the way that we expect it should. So let's move on to the next slide, Jorge, and begin to form conclusions. And if any of you have questions, I think there's you've been able to send them in. And we can see here, direct experience, objective knowledge, mystical experience. That is the actual point. So although in this lesson we've done a lot of talking, or I've done a lot of talking, it's merely to introduce us to the concept that actually freedom is not going to be achieved by having money, and it's not going to be achieved by which country you live in, or what social level or cultural level or what religion you have. That does not guarantee freedom. Freedom can only be obtained when we are free of our own limitations, and those are inside of us, not outside of us. And our experiences in the outside world, in the physical world, are merely the reflection of what's going on inside of us. And that is, if you like, a universal law, which is why the underlying principle of meditation is we were free, our essence is per se free, but in order to reunite with our essence and become truly free beings, conscious beings, it's necessary for us to awaken our consciousness. And that is why meditation becomes an essential component of our daily existence. So I hope you've enjoyed the introduction. As I said, we're not saying anything new for many of you who've tuned in, but let's hope that others of you will also be enthused to investigate more, learn more, and embark upon your own adventure, your own unique journey into your own unique, mysterious self, in order to see what you can discover and come up with, and how many benefits you can get from practicing, and at the same time, how can you obtain a deeper and richer life in the level that you yourselves decide, because our job is to explain that meditation is a spectrum of possibilities, and as I said earlier, it's what you want it to be. If you want to define meditation as a relaxation exercise between work, then that's what it is for you. If you want to define it as actually, yes, we are on this cosmic journey of consciousness and returning to our origins and to fuse ourselves with the great cosmos and our inner being in the science of self-realization, well, then that's what it is. That's what we need. But then that's how we've accepted it. So the universe is a huge place. Consciousness is limitless. And the forces that have created the universe or universes are also limitless. And therefore, if we come from them, then we ultimately have the possibility of creating our own, or assisting our essence back to its place in the cosmos. And the existence or being existing here in a physical realm on our little planet, in our little solar system, in our galaxy, where we don't even know where we live, we don't even know our address in the galaxy. So it is to realize that actually we're in a school, and that the school is our body, the school is our senses, the school is our emotions, the school is our mind, the school is our civilization. And it's entirely up to us whether we wake or we don't. It's entirely up to us what we do with ourselves, and it's entirely our own responsibility. And there is no way out of our own processes except through awakening. So if there are any questions, it would be we could have a look at them on the WhatsApp. I'll just tune up here and see whether Jorge has sent us any questions on the chat. And in the meantime, I think we can prepare ourselves for the next lessons by taking into account that we need a vision. If we have a vision of the greatness of the universe, if we have a vision of the limitless nature of consciousness, if we have a vision that as we are a drastically reduced expression of consciousness, and then we can begin to relax, actually, because we don't have to expect of ourselves to be a great thing. We don't have to place unnecessary demands upon ourselves, because connection to universal truth is about abandoning all self-image, self-ideas, in order to experience something that's beyond that. So the invitation will be that actually relaxation and just saying, oh, wow, phew, I actually don't have to know the meaning of life. I don't have to be anybody. I don't have to be something for anybody. It's enough to exist and relax and allow for, from inside of us, new energies to make themselves accessible to us. And all our practices we do for relaxation are to enable those other more subtle energies in our consciousness to work from within us, assisting us. And for this, relaxation is hugely fundamental, because our cells are also conscious, our atoms are also conscious. In fact, everything that exists in the universe is conscious of itself. And we won't go into the mysteries of the atom now, but the atom itself is conscious. If we accept that, then we can sit back and allow ourselves to be. And that is a state of consciousness. It's a state of relaxing. And I think if you receive the words that we're transmitting in our hearts, then we can feel that obtaining inner silence and tranquility is actually the answer to most of our difficulties and problems, which is why we hear it in the English language, the still small voice of silence. And the still small voice of silence is inside of us. And when we listen to the stream, when we listen to the birds, when we listen to especially classical music, then we can hear the language of life, the language of nature. And this is a language we're not taught in school. It's not a language of our mind, but it is the language of life and meaning. And therefore, I see there's a question, do we have techniques? Well, we're going to be looking at that in the next class, or the next two classes. But actually what I'm speaking about now is to do with the vision that we have, the notion that there does exist silence inside of us, and silence speaks and doesn't obey any kind of mental concept. Knowledge doesn't obey your or my idea of knowledge. Life is its own, and therefore it's up to us who wish to have a better life to have the humility to embrace the silence in ourselves, discover the silence, and discover the mysteries that are hidden within us. And these are impregnated and pulsating with meaning. And which is why we have to take refuge inside ourselves and create access to spaces that already exist inside of ourselves, which free us from the rules of the world. They free us from the preoccupations of the mind and the world. And there becomes a separation of the self from the self. In other words, we become an observer of who we perceive ourselves to be in daily life. So we can observe our mind, we can observe our emotions, we can observe our feelings. And this enables us to awaken. And it enables us to have distance from this over-identification with an overcomplicated, over-demanding, and very cruel and deceitful world with very deceitful philosophies and objectives. And inside of us is the doorway to a journey to light and freedom. And on that journey, of course, we have to face all our fears, and we have to face our own, for want of a better word, demons or fears, all those things that are lurking inside of us, of which we don't want to look at and discover. And it requires deep sincerity and actually bravery, because the things we're going to face inside of ourselves, some of them aren't very nice. But it's all a part of the journey, and meditation is part of that. It's part of that science. So I think we can conclude. There are questions about how to improve intuition.